But before we come back to Jerusalem, during the time of Joshua, I want to take us to this place called Hebron, or Hebron in Hebrew. One of the kings among many of these kings and areas that Joshua conquered when they came into the land was the king at Hebron. But Hebron is a very significant city. You see the Jerusalem in this map where that red star is. If you look down to the south, just to the west a little bit, you see Hebron there. In Israel, it's about 20-25 minute drive from Jerusalem today. Okay? And so that's the location of Hebron. When you're going to approach Jerusalem from the south, you got to come through Hebron before you're ever going to get up there. So you're going to have to conquer below and take control before you're going to take control. Yes?
Was that like a day's march, or?
What was that?
Is that like a day's march?
20-25 miles. I'd say that's probably within reason. Yeah, it's probably within reason. Now it's interesting. Now when Joshua conquered Hebron, he gives it to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, who is a Kenizzite. What's a Kenizzite? A Kenizzite is a Canaanite. Okay? Most people don't know this, that Caleb was not born an Israelite. He was a Canaanite, but he converted to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whether he was in Egypt or however he got there or in the wilderness, and he was assigned allotment to the tribe of Judah. Caleb was one of the 12 spies. When the second year when they were in the wilderness, when each of the 12 tribes assigned one to go into the promised land and to look, and they came back with they say it's a land of milk and honey. And they had all this big fruit and grapes and everything, but they said, we're like grasshoppers in the size of those people, in the people's eyes there, and we're scared to go in. But Caleb and Joshua, they came back and gave a good report, and they said, we can still go in, even though there's many of them, more than us, and they're strong, but we're going in the power of God. We'll go, and we'll do what God has said. If they would have did that, they only had to spend 1.5 to 2 years in the wilderness. But because of that, they had to spend another 38 years in the wilderness, and the curse came because of the other 10 spies convinced Israel against Moses and Joshua and Caleb to not go into the land at that time. And because of that, God said all those that are of the age of 20 and older will die off in the wilderness. And it's a matter of Jewish tradition, but you can follow it in the Scripture, that except Caleb and Joshua. They were over 20 at the time. They were the only ones that were over the age of 60 that came to the Promised Land. When the children of Israel came into the Promised Land, they were a very young people. They were all under 60 years of age, and some of them born in those last 38 years that they came in. Because all that were 20 years of age and older had died, and Moses and Aaron also died before they came into the Promised Land. But Caleb, because of his obedience during the spying, and because following after God, he was given permission, allotment by Joshua to go in and drive these 3 sons of Anak, Sheshi, Ahiman, and Talmi, the children of Anak, out of Hebron, and he took control of it, and he inherited that city of the tribe of for the tribe of Judah. But it was his city, his children's city, and that's very important. Now, why Hebron? And we just talked about the spies and all that, but we have a timestamp in the Scripture here. In Numbers chapter 13, it tells us that when the spies went into the Promised Land, one of the places they went to is Hebron, where at that time Ahiman, Sheshi, and Talmi, which some years later Joshua would defeat with Caleb. But they go there, and we have a time stamp here. It says, now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. Now why is that there? Well, it's a time stamp because we have the approximate time that Zoan was built in Egypt. This city, Zoan in Egypt, was in the vicinity of Goshen, where the Israelites were when they were in Egyptian bondage. And we know that Zoan was already a city before Israel came in to Egypt. And so we have a time stamp, and we know it's back to the 18th to 19th century BCE that even Hebron existed and was a city. Okay? And that's very important because that takes it back to the time of Abraham and validates the Scripture. But notice, why would the 12 spies, why would Caleb and Joshua spend time overlooking Hebron? Why was Hebron important to them when they spied out the promised land? Well, we go back to Abraham. Okay? Abraham removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. So not only do we have scriptural documentation, but we have a timestamp that places it back to the time of the patriarchs that Hebron was a city at that time. And Abraham put an altar there and worshiped the Lord and offered sacrifice to God. It was a spiritual place to Abraham in recognition, not only of that, but when Sarah died, Abraham's wife, the city at that time was called Kiriath Arba, which is the same as Hebron. Okay, that later was named to Hebron. And we learn that Abraham buried Sarah in this cave in the field of Machpelah. There was a cave that Abraham purchased for the family burial site. And if you follow the scriptures through, you will see that Abraham was buried there, his wife Sarah was buried there, his son Isaac was buried there, Isaac's wife Rebekah is buried there, Isaac's son Jacob is buried there, and Jacob's wife Leah is buried there. The other wife, Rachel, she's not buried here. She's buried up towards Jerusalem, okay, in another place. She died, it tells us in the scripture that she died on the way that when Jacob was coming through the area of Jerusalem, and he buried her in this place where Rachel's buried, and we have all kinds of scriptures on that. But so you have 3 patriarchs and the 3 matriarchs outside of Rachel that are buried in the cave of Machpelah and Hebron, and they would have been buried there when Caleb and Joshua went up there to spy out the land. Hebron was very important because of the patriarchs. Now, there's some information here about Zoan. I believe it was the capital of the Hyksos, which was an Egyptian dynasty of pharaohs before the dynasty that later was a different pharaoh that came in and did all the harsh things to the Jewish people, the Israelites. And they have artifacts that they document these things and all that. But the connection to Abraham and the matriarchs and the patriarchs is what's important here. Now, just to give you a glimpse, see Zoan up there where the balloon is. That area, Ramses, and we don't really know. We haven't really found these places exactly today, but we know in that vicinity is Goshen in Egypt, where the Israelites were in bondage and captivity during those years of the pharaohs. Now, this is a picture that I took in March 2009. Inside this building, which I'm going to show you in a moment, houses the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, and Leah are enshrined and buried way deep beneath the ground. I mean, when you go into the tombs, they're not really there. They were buried way deep in the cave. This is like a monument on top of it. But the history of this is so well documented. These are Herodian stones. These were, when King Herod came to power in the 1st century BCE and into he died just before the turn, before it became the 1st century. He not only refurbished the temple and built all these lavish palaces and all these things, built new cities, but he built over the cave of Machpelah, of the patriarchs, as it was important to Judaism. And these are Herodian stones that date back 2,000 years ago, and they're still there today. And the main structure of this building is from the time of Herod. And of course, it existed before that. He just modified it and strengthened it to fortify it. And that's what it looks like on the outside. Now remember, it's a cave under the ground where Abraham purchased for the burial, okay? But this is what it's developed over the years.